awesome.
Excellent. Welcome to another session of Dancing with Change in Facility Management. And this morning, I have two guests, both of which have been on Dancing with Change already, but we are going to have a conversation together, which is going to be even more enlightening. So, firstly, I've got Maureen Sullivan. She's a procurement lawyer. She's been deeply immersed in the world of procurement for over 20 years. She actually assumed ownership of the National Education Consulting Inc. in 2009, embarked on transitioning its award-winning procurement training programs to the online environment. We're all online now. And as owner, curriculum developer, and lead instructor, Maureen has worked with over 100 public and quasi-public organizations to design custom training solutions. So she's a sought after speaker at supply chain and procurement conferences and events and building industry events too. She's delivered over 10,000 hours of training and was named to the top 100 women in supply chain in Canada in 2019. She's also the author of A Guide to Practical Procurement, and since investing her interest in her company, the Procurement School, she consults as fairness monitor and process advisor to organizations committed to transparency in procurement. So, welcome, Maureen.
Thank you. Welcome. Happy to be here.
And also, I'd like to also introduce Hinesh. Getting your bio here, Hinesh. Hinesh Chauhan. He's a project manager and he's also a former Canadian Armed Forces. Well, he's a veteran now, former work part of that community. And he's also a former federal government executive who oversaw two infrastructure stimulus programs and was responsible for departmental real property capital investments, is known for transforming complex infrastructure programs across Canada. He's led multi-billion-dollar portfolios. He's built national project management frameworks, driven innovation in procurement, asset management, and low-carbon construction. So, drawing on his military, government, and private sector leadership, he now advises organizations globally as a management consultant, helping them strengthen governance, reduce risk, accelerate capital delivery. Hinesh is also a creator of Integrated Stewardship. You can find him on LinkedIn, a system that brings real-time accountability and transparency to projects and operations. So, two very accomplished guests today. We're going to have a very informed, detailed discussion. And our focus, of course, is on procurement. We're at a time right now, globally, where much change is taking place. And obviously, that is having impact on the built environment, on managing the built environment. It's having impact on the inputs to the built environment, including how we procure, where we procure, and what that means going forward. And it's not solely stuff, although we buy a lot of stuff in this industry, but it's actually procuring services, procuring design and construction services as well. So the challenge right now is with this very accelerating change, how do we form some level of reliable stability in how we move forward? And maybe we can start with contracts first, I would think, because everything starts with design and construction and then it flows from there. So, do you want to offer some insights into this?
I'd say Maureen's probably better suited for this, but just to lay out the importance of this discussion and the time allocated for us is just not enough because of where things are shifting. And it's not just the volatility and geopolitical events, it's the outcome from that, the unaffordability, increased energy costs, dilapidated underinvestment in infrastructure, and how increased taxation is not going to cover it. So we really have to figure out how to get value for money across all stakeholders. So I just wanted to lay that out there. And create the incentives to balance the wins across all parties. So I think that's a good starting point for contracts.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a lot going on, and frankly, a lot of people I think in facilities are just struggling to keep their head above water right now, right? With all of the still, we've got the retirements, we've got all of that, lack of newcomers coming up through the ranks. So, trying to wrap your head around change and innovation and AI and all of the things coming at them, I think it's pretty overwhelming. And as you say, there's just so much going on all levels for folks to try and stay on top of. I would just say, when you're feeling that overwhelm, come back to the basics. What are we doing? What current contracts, contract structures do we have? How can we weave in innovation, but don't lose sight of getting things done and moving ahead with your projects? And I mean, that sort of paralysis that folks can run into is like, oh, there's so much changing. What are we going to do? The costs are going up. How are we going to manage? So, yeah, it's a challenging time, I'm sure, especially again, like you say, Hinesh, with the failing infrastructure that we do have. Like a lot of it's been neglected for so long, and now we're hitting that sort of crisis point. Yeah, tough.
So
Yeah, and defining in those contracts, of course, contracts identify what needs to be delivered and by when, but including the incentives and negative incentives for the proponent or for the parties that make part of the contract to make sure that they deliver not just on time, on scope, on schedule, but to have a quality standard. And if they don't achieve it, then the consequences against that with the quality guarantee, because I could throw up a house in no time, but how long will it last, or what is the ongoing life cycle maintenance required from a poor quality product? So being able to create those post completion bonuses or holdbacks, being able to structure it properly, because we're humans, and at the end of the day, people will cut corners naturally. And so breaking it down by milestones, as opposed to giving out the contract and letting everything go until the completion date and then handing over the money. There has to be an incremental milestone controls, and being able to manage the risk by ensuring that the right thing's being done at the right point to the right standard.
I'm going to throw this out there because I know that with all of this change, we can't go this alone. We really need a series, a group of reliable contributors to this. So whether we set this up through standing offer agreements, or whether we and certainly what I promote is lean design and construction, whether we get everyone in the same room at the same time so that we can work through these changes that are constantly coming at us, and rather than having this linear traditional approach. So I'd like your thoughts on that, and whether you feel that establishing this kind of a community of practice through standing offer agreements or other mechanisms that we can actually work at this together. Because, and another thing I want to bring into this, construction projects take a while. And with this level of change so rapidly, we can expect pricing on products to be all over the map. So it's not, I don't believe, a traditional approach to how we manage projects. We have to partner up with this and realize this will happen. So please feed into that and your thoughts on how we might structure relationships to actually benefit.
One thing I would say out of the gate is I think a lot more use of things like group purchasing organizations, standing offers that are already in place with major governments, things like that, for your smaller sort of O&M and all of your maintenance and all of the sort of facilities management things that are not the large scale innovation. And I think there's more and more, I'm seeing more and more a move to that, even in construction, where typically it hasn't actually been a construction-based approach. That way, your folks are freed up to focus on the innovation. And as Hinesh said, thinking about building incentives into your contract, not just the sticks, right? You don't perform, we hold back money. I think folks have to get more creative now to really attract the top quality players to the table. And if you can free up your staff to focus on that while you take care of some of the more routine things through some of these existing standing offers, frees up a lot of time in the procurement chain, if you will, in my opinion. See a lot of that.
I think there's a major opportunity in, well, just as an aside, having a community of practice and being able to share for the knowledge transfer from those that are retiring and have the expertise to the consolidation of teams as we face financial pressures and losing that knowledge. Having a community of practice helps that knowledge transfer across all regions, across all industries within the facilities or infrastructure group. But to be able to actually take advantage of the new technology and truly innovate, because the industry works against innovation with the large associations that want to protect their business and keep things the way they are. There's a reason why the associations, the professional associations, or whether it's plumbing, electrical, and so forth, of being able to protect their geographical regions and not allow the movement of talent and services and goods across provinces. They're a big part of that, which hurts our economy to a factor of 7% of GDP for those barriers of movement internally within our country. So being able to look at that to allow more movement of ideas across provinces is one piece. And the other piece is to actually look to smaller players to enter the market with new innovation, because you've got the CCA, the concrete players using very dated, almost engineered obsolescence materials when there are better solutions out there. And we're just not seeing them get to market. We're not seeing municipalities, provinces, the feds use what is better and is cheaper in the long run. So that's hurting us in a really big way. But these parties have a tremendous amount of influence. So that's a really big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, well, we're in Canada, so that's certainly what I know most. But given the amount of focus lately and going forward on major projects in this country, I can see that that is certainly going to challenge a number of things, not necessarily in a bad way. I think it invites a great deal of activity. I'm hoping it invites a lot more collaboration on getting these big projects done, but it's going to involve a lot of construction, a lot of design engineering, a lot of trades, and the question arises, how best do we come together to make that happen? Are our traditional project structures actually going to meet this challenge, this busy challenge, or are we going to have to, come together as consortiums to actually address this and kind of work together? Now, I know we've got, two or three or four really large construction companies in Canada. They work in the US as well. But there's also a lot of smaller companies. And so I don't know if you have any insights into how that might come together, or how, as procuring services, setting up, managing these projects, we can actually accelerate this coming together.
I think there is a huge major projects make for great announceables. So when you think from the political level, ultimately that's what they want. And to maybe phase it or gear it to be able to target when to announce what by when, so that in 2.5 years before election campaigns, they're able to say Churchill's opened up, which won't happen in that time frame. this has happened with alleviated pressure at Thunder Bay, at Vancouver, because we've got this increased infrastructure. That's what they want to say because they want to maintain power and they want to continue to get reelected. But on the other hand, the additional layers of red tape. So a project over a certain value or a certain size has to now not only go through internal organizational processes, it also has to deal with the impact assessment agency and go through all these consultations. So there's increased barriers to actually deliver and provide Canada what's needed. Infrastructure not only helps increase economic churn, but the facilitated movement of everything that it provides is the value we need. So say if it's high-speed rail, what that would bring. So consortiums, I think being able to put more out to the market to say, this is what we need, can you deliver? And doing it in a way that's responsible, because what's done for that high-speed rail corridor has been a major procurement process in its own just to do the definition activities. And it's a massive amount. If you looked at what the cost of that was, it'd shock you. And what result do we get out of it? Is this another study that's going to be shelved for years to come? So line in the sand, this is the scope, this is what we need, put it out to industry, and have create P3s, allow consortiums to be able to bid on these, but it's also giving them the heads up. This is what we're thinking, and doing the industry consultations to understand what the market can provide to then shape the bid. And that's just not happening. So we're not going to see all these needed initiatives built out because the government doesn't have the money to do it, and they're not incentivizing the smaller players to come and play. And the level of effort just to apply on to these things is enormous. So that's yet again another barrier to enter into the competition. So, and if you've been on the inside, you've seen the collusion. I've seen the collusion where the big firms on their own get together and everyone chooses who's going to bid on the next one. And you can see the pricing adjustment each time and say, okay, I can see it's these guys' turns, hence the way these bids have been structured. It's shocking.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And that's such a long standing issue, but we are seeing it more and more. And I think as you put out more of these large projects and you do attract, these sort of larger players, there can be more opportunity for that to go on. And of course, that erodes the value that the taxpayer is getting. It erodes the value for your project, ends up costing everybody more. So yeah, I like the industry consultation. I like the consortium approach. I think allowing players to come together, but you still, as I said, coming back to the basics, you need the appropriate checks and balances. You need the control structures. You need a very well-defined scope. This is what we're looking for so that it doesn't go, no pun intended, but off the rails, right? You end up with something that, yeah, it's great and it's exciting, but it's 5 times what we thought it was going to be. And it's not actually meeting the needs that we set out to achieve. So there's that balance of flexibility and innovation with traditional controls and structure. And I think it's a tough line to walk right now, I think.
Well, and this is part of, I think, the challenge, particularly for expertise, like procurement, like project delivery in many, many different scenarios, is how can we, the owner, and that being the government in this case, how can we actually structure going to market so that we benefit not only the end result, but that we encourage collaboration, even in this highly competitive environment, because there's so much work to get done, and it's complex, and we really letting it play out in a linear fashion is just repeating yesterday. We really want people to come together a round table, hopefully, and share situations and work together because we can't do We can't check this out and then throw it over our shoulder to the next guy and, okay, now you check that out. So what we really want to do is set up the situation through procurement, undoubtedly, to actually bring together all of these experts to, okay, we've got a major, challenge ahead of us. We need to work together and get the best value for everybody out of this. But I think it needs to start with procurement.
And I think a lot of what you do, Kathleen, with the lean procurement and that kind of approach where there's shared risk is one of the keys to actually keeping their attention on quality and price controls and that kind of thing. So I think we're probably going to see more of a focus on that, where the larger projects, okay, how are we going to share the risks and how do we each bear what's appropriate under the circumstance? I think that's going to be a big, much more important, I think, going forward with some of these massive projects that need to be undertaken.
And to your point as well, Hinish, mentioning P3s, that frequently is, to your point, Maureen, that's a shared risk, shared reward setup, typically. Now, there are some risks and there's some history of these risks transpiring, but so we can learn from that, and we can probably approach a number of these large projects through that particular structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just the benefit of, let's say, a large infrastructure project, light rail in a city, and getting where it's funded by institutional finance. They've got recurring, predictable revenue from the fees coming from the municipality. The municipality has predictable invoicing and can manage their budget in a better way. The consortium that's created is doing the design, the finance, the build, the operate, the maintain. They build a better product that is less expensive to maintain. The risk is shared. The incentives and the benefits are shared. And so you get better outcomes. I think that is the best case scenario for long life cycle assets like this because of the front end cost, which then it's like accrual finance. It gets spread out over the life of it and it becomes predictable for everybody. So to me, that seems like a no-brainer. And procurement's an afterthought. We have to stop that. If there's the single lowest, largest piece of fruit that should be plucked is that giant watermelon that's bending over the oak, because that is bringing them to the forefront to identify what the needs of the project, program, initiative is, to then start doing that outward interfacing with industry, to do the request for informations, to do the consultations, to even understand what's out there, because that's the lack of understanding the capabilities and new innovations that exist hurt us as well, because we're just doing the same things the same way, expecting different results.
Yes.
It can't be. It has to stop being an afterthought. Procurement has to be at the front end.
Yeah. And one thing I would add into that that's particularly important for those really big projects where you have consortia, you have shared risks, sometimes there's shared operations, shared ownership of the infrastructure. On the planning and the procurement end of it, I think government needs to keep a closer eye on building in what I call contestability. In other words, if this is like a 10-year deal and it's like maintain, operate for 10 years, how does government take that back? How does government go back out to market, right, with this? Or do they simply transfer this infrastructure to private sector, which I don't think it would go very well with taxpayers, right? And I don't know that there's enough foresight given to that. Like at the end of this long deal, how are we ever going to get true competition to operate it, or whatever the issue might be? So I think that's something, as we move to these bigger, more complex, more collaborative type of processes, don't lose sight of the end game, right, at the end of it, right?
That's a really good point, because I've seen this where you've now lost the internal capacity and knowledge to be able to manage anything related to the asset. And then the proponent managing the asset has stopped O&M on it for the last 2 years, as they know the contracts run out And so now you've got a subpar asset with no internal knowledge of how to even understand it, and you're going to market without that knowledge. So that's a big deal. Understanding what happens afterwards, being able to not just have the contract option extensions, but how do you go to market and to define at what standard it has to be maintained and handed over at the end of that contractual period.
Yes, yeah. And creating that expectation for the incumbent that it may end one day, right? So they're not,
Yes.
it's not this ever, never, never, never thing for them where it's just going to be extended and extended. And government sometimes backs itself into a corner where, going out to market isn't an option. There's no one else out there that can do it for whatever reason, or we don't have the internal expertise to operate this. We don't even know how to go to market with it anymore because that's all faded away after those 10 years or whatever. So, yeah.
That is such a key thing because we have in this country had experience with P3s, and for quite some time actually. It's having that foresight and looking that far in advance to understand whether it's a project and knowing that, at some point it's going to need this, that. I mean, that's just O&M planning for the most part. That's strategic infrastructure, but also how you manage it. And P3s, and we've had discussions about P3s, but there were a number of hospital projects in Canada that were delivered through a P3 arrangement. I was part of one of them actually. And the O&M, the facility management part of that, and I think the contracts were probably about 20 years in length, but the company went bankrupt. And so anticipating that, I mean, these things can happen. It's certainly
Mhm.
not something that happens every day, thank heavens, but it can and does happen. And so as part of that, actually going into a P3, I'm just giving you some of my experience here, but the facility management group that was already working at this hospital was pulled into the P3 under this new arrangement. So lots of knowledge. And then when that went south after a certain period of time, then that facility management group was pulled back into the organization, the hospital organization. So I don't know whether that happens all the time, but we need to keep that in mind that we have to look forward.
Mhm.
And when we're in the infrastructure game, we should be looking forward anyway. It's not just today, and it's not just how we set this up today, but we really need to have the longer term view. And I think
Mhm.
that's why we pull procurement into the room day one when we're first thinking of this idea, because putting together strategies for going into the beginning and closing it off at the end, whenever the ends might be, is so much about how we need to structure contracts, how we need to approach the marketplace, how we, as whether we're government or whatever, need to anticipate risk.
Mhm.
Because granted, there may be one or two risks that creep up we've never met before, but likely not. We've probably seen them all.
That's it. It's not. This isn't a new industry. In terms of, I just think for my personal real estate portfolio, if my property manager quit, I'm euchred. So thinking about that the same way of having a condition in the contract that the asset owner has the right to be able to audit or have the proponent provide auditable financial statements to show how insolvent they are and to be able to have a mitigation strategy for a backup service provider for every element that the P3 partner is providing. And at the end of the contract, whether it's extended or not, to have the contract have a clause about handover requirements that
Mhm.
they will provide a seamless handover, what that is, a user guide, and they will have advisors blend through that new engagement over with a phased level of I guess intensity to be able to hand that over and transfer the knowledge and so forth. Because you're right, we just think of it's fine. Contract's done. Yay. We can announce this and everything's going to be fine until you reach the end of that contract.
Yeah. So two things jump out at me, and what Kathleen was saying as well about your story about the company going under. Let's not lose sight of your traditional risk mitigation strategies like bonding and sureties. Like,
Yes.
let's make sure we build that in. Yeah, they're a great company, and yeah, they got a great track record, but foresee the unforeseen sort of thing. And those, we tend to lose sight of some of those traditional tried and true strategies. And the other piece, Hinesh, about the transition requirements, that is so important, because I always say with contracts, like, if it's going well and the company thinks they're going to get more work from you, then it's going to be great, but Lord forbid something goes wrong, or you have to pull a bond, or there has to be some really serious conversations, they may not cooperate with that transition. And then because they know the inside scoop. You can really get yourself into a pickle if you don't anticipate that and hold back money, of course, and have some incentives for them to cooperate with that transition. Because that can be a disaster as well. If the relationship didn't go very well, you may not have their attention at the end of the contract.
And I think that this is underlying, I mean, both in the owner operator situation, but also in these types of arrangements, that you don't build and walk away and hope everything works out. It's really the value of facility management is involvement every step of the way, including shutting things down at the very end when assets have reached the end of their life. And so that is the thread of continuity, right from the idea that we need this new whatever physical infrastructure through to how we go to market, how we design and construct it, how we manage, operate it, and ultimately how we retire it at the end. Lots of players involved all along the pathway. So having this broader, more detailed view, I think is actually the way we need to procure, quite frankly.
Mhm. And I love that concept of continuity, right? Maintain some kind of knowledge infrastructure throughout it, whether it's the same team or whatever, so that, because as you say, Kathleen, you can have one piece ends and another team moves in, and then another piece starts and then another team moves in. And nobody's really sometimes doesn't have the big picture of, well, why did we start out that way and where are we going with this? So that continuity, whether it's a team, whether it's a specific department, whatever it might be, I think is really important in those larger long-term projects to be considering in the planning stage, right? And
I think
making sure, if somebody retires, you've got a replacement in line, or if something happens. Yeah.
Continuity of care. When you're sharing that, Maureen, it made me think of our medical industry, or getting a certain level of care, setting service standards for how the facility must operate, the standard it provides, and the service it provides to the users of it, why it exists, and then being able to, because that becomes your North Star. This is what we need to maintain. How do we maintain that? What's required to do that? We have to keep the asset up to a certain level or condition. Who's doing that? And what are the investment requirements to sustain this over the long run? And then look at how the people doing it, what their performance metrics are in performing those, and really breaking it down. And then when you have that I guess value chain, then you're being able to war game it in terms of what happens if something is removed from this Jenga tower, and how does it affect us, and who has to come in with that stopgap. So just being able to map that out for, why does this exist, what's the capability for whom, and then drawing it out from underneath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, focusing in those sort of key success factors. And then the performance metrics, of course, critical. But over the long term, they have to be somewhat flexible. Like, users' needs can change, or external technology can change, or something can, you got to be flexible enough to be able to bob and weave with it without losing sight of your key performance, your success factors that you want to still keep an eye on, as far as from the user's perspective, So yeah, challenging. Like I like your Jenga analysis. I think that's a good one, right?
But and
So
that's a really good point because the needs do change. And I, with Kathleen on our last discussion, I was talking about overseeing facilities that had a high scientist community that had hard copies of everything. Now that things are digitized, they don't need that space, so it changes. So if you're updating a service level agreement every year, then you have the facility reps being able to provide the clients, their occupants, and their needs. Then your requirements are defined. So I think that's a very important aspect is to have a recurring check-in of do we still need this even? Can we now rent out part of it because our space requirements have decreased?
well, actually, this is quite critical, and I'm glad you used the example of a hospital, Hinish, because so much is changing in the health delivery scenario in that whole business. And I mean, even if it's just new equipment that's getting changed out, and incidentally, there's a lot of new equipment coming and going, and so it really demands that you know facility managers are part of these decisions because they're the ones moving walls and cleaning up messes and doing all of that. They're an integral part of the operating day-to-day stuff. But taking it back to the beginning, the design of the building, we have to go into this scenario understanding that things will change, that we need to design this with features to allow this change easily done so that we don't have, weeks of closed off corridors and drywall dust all over the place, but we think differently about this. And again, it comes back to how we set up these contracts and how we actually invite this kind of innovation into a known service delivery scenario that will be changing, right? So how can we actually uh, indicate that in our procurement efforts so that we set the stage and we get the right folks replying to these opportunities so that we actually have this level of designed and built-in flexibility for the changes that we're anticipating coming down the pipe.
And I think it's doubly problematic or challenging in this day. Coming back to your very opening comments, not only do you have potential changes of the user's needs and new technology coming on stream and new players, but you also have like supply chain disruptions and new materials. As Hinesh said, maybe there's some innovative new materials coming along, or we can't get what we used to get, or so being flexible enough that the service provider, the contractor has some confidence knowing if things change in their industry and they're not able to source the traditional products, that the owner will work with them to try and come up with maybe something better or something different. Or so, there's these different tentacles of change we need to kind of manage and foresee, for our crystal ball as we look forward. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I think there's more so now than there ever has been.
Which then,
Yeah, go ahead.
you mentioned technology, and I do want to explore that because one of the largest changes in the world right now has to do with technology, AI, and to what extent organizations and businesses and individuals are actually delving into AI and how we actually plan for that. Now, this isn't a discussion about data centers, although we could ultimately get into that. But the whole use of AI, I'm just thinking about that certainly in the FM business that gets rid of a lot of storage room documents and and file cabinets and old drawings and things like that, which is a very positive. But how do we respond to these kinds of changes then uh, on a legal level, right? Through procurement, and how do we set up projects that actually encourages digitization? One of the biggest challenges for facility management is all of the information in the design and the build and the transfer of that over to facility management to operate the building.
Mhm. Ash, anything?
Sure. And the point I was going to make about the hospitals being one the most complex assets you can build, and the greater demand for energy, and how is that managed? Not just coming into the facility, but how's that routed to additional MRI machines, to new machines that require more power is complicated. AI, and I may need you to clarify the question, but ultimately, I believe AI is wonderful, but if it's misused, you're just going to fail faster. And there is, again, let's just go for the low hanging fruit and being able to consolidate systems within an organization so that you can easily communicate, collaborate, and consolidate all this information. That would help because when I talk to friends in the government and just listen to how inefficient they are and what they're doing, and oh, we need a new person to be able to populate these spreadsheets. And I just think, holy F, are you kidding me? I could do that in 2 minutes with AI for a $20 US, so like 10,000 Canadian a month subscription. Boom, you can get it. But digitization and using building information modeling just to have the data to be able to estimate the material requirements more efficiently, again, should be a no brainer. That should be the minimum standard. And then from there is being able to you can share that information. You can put it into AI models to for space optimization. There's just so many efficiencies that can be had, and which is why after we hear from Maureen is being able to pinpoint that question to a specific application. But there's also the realities of protectionism of different trades of engineers and architects where this is going to impact professional services jobs. And the first reaction within the government is, oh, we have a supply arrangement on this. I'm just going to go click on this to get this. So we're just too reactive and not leveraging the tools to start gaining the wins that are at our fingertips.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, from a big picture, like AI, of course, is all the buzz. Everyone's talking about it. From my perspective, I see it more as sort of as you said, Hanesh, more of a refining and streamlining tool, not necessarily a solutions building tool. And that's where I think procurement folks are like, oh, it's going to take away my job, right? If AI starts to build our RFPs, like, wait a minute, no, no, no. Like, you still need to know what you want. You need to define your requirements. You need to assess the market. You still need to go through all those steps. No machine in the world is going to be able to take care of that for you on a regular basis, right? So we need to kind of think of it, as you say, refining, taking over data input, taking over some of those more simplistic kind of roles. But I don't think it's going to, in the long term, it's going to free up the creation, the innovative creation that humans are designed to have, right? And the routine day-to-day tasks should be taken over if they can be. In my view, but a lot of people are afraid of it because, whoa, what am I going to do? My job's taken over. No, it's just going to free you up to do the big, exciting, innovative, challenging kind of stuff. So, yeah, but we're still early days, I think, but very exciting.
So one thing that I've certainly been promoting is that we have to react differently to how we move from design and construction into facility management. And so I'm absolutely promoting that facility managers need to be at the front end, part of procurement, part of setting up the project, and so on. But they also need to input into the specifications, into the project requirements, the technologies that they need to actually operate and maintain this building. So, and they also need to have input on where equipment is located so they don't have to relocate an entire library to get at a mechanical duct or something. So this can and should, I think, be input into the procurement side of things, right? That be prepared on this design and construction that this is uh, you know, we're going to use AI for this, or we're going to use this type of building operating system and yada, yada, yada. But the requirements, I think, have far more impact when they are part of the procurement documents.
Absolutely.
So I'm encouraging that facility managers really get involved in procurement right from the get-go.
And
And I,
lean and agile principles apply here. It's bringing everyone to the front of being able to define the requirements. And requirements are one thing. It's how it's built and it's executed is a different thing. And what comes to mind is a knife versus a food processor. I'm going to use the knife 9 times out of 10 because it's easier to clean. And that's the facilities manager's thinking is I'm at the end of the day, I have to deal with this. And if I have to always deal with cleaning the food processor, I need more labor. This is more cost. This is more time. It takes my attention away from other things because of the resource intensity of this. So having those discussions at the front end to say, okay, what does that look like? Sure, that's defined. This is being built, but this is what we say. So lean, IPD, that's where it starts.
right. And always, always my big message for procurement is bring them in early, early, early. And I think you made a great point there, Hinesh, just because there is this brand new fancy innovative food processor doesn't mean it's the right tool for this particular project. And unless you bring the users and the people that are going to be operating it into that discussion early on, you can end up with something that, yeah, okay, it's going to look good. And from a political perspective, we're doing all this exciting stuff. But on the ground, it's either going to fail or it's going to be way more expensive or it's going to be, create more roadblocks than it solves. So innovation for the sake of innovation, not always something that you want to consider. And unless you bring the users and you bring the actual on the ground, boots on the ground people in up front, you run that risk, I think, because procurement's like, oh, this is great, this is exciting, but they don't have that lived experience.
Good point.
And this is something where facilities managers are neglected. They're taken for granted for the work they do, how well they know the asset, the recommendations they can give for, oh, if we're rebuilding or repairing, let's do this instead. Let's have double swing doors instead of two parallel doors for egress. So it's their practical knowledge which really matters, and it's taking them seriously and bringing them to the front and understanding that those who run the asset should have the greatest say.
Uh-huh.
It also really encourages that facility managers, and because they're there every day, that they understand a lot more about the business going on within the building than anyone else. And just a quick story on that. It was a P3 hospital, but there hadn't been a really good capture of hospital equipment. So this building is going up really quickly. And then the hospital equipment starts to arrive, and they hadn't planned for, okay, how are we going to get this equipment in? So if you can't plan for how you're going to get it in, then you're never going to plan for how you're going to get it out.
Uh-huh.
So actually what happened just to accommodate that situation there was they totally redesigned walls so that they could move them and get this huge equipment in and out. But, that could have happened and should have happened with a capture of requirements for the occupants
Uh-huh.
of the building, right? And now, certainly because change is so much more prevalent and it's happening more quickly, we need to be absolutely designing buildings for change because change is going to be required sooner than later.
Uh-huh.
I think there's a lot of healthy cross pollination between complex facilities, hospitals being one of the most complex, and ships and warships,
Mm.
and bringing those parties together because they're dealing with the same level of complexity and an extended life of the asset, but a significant amount of change over the lifespan of it and how they manage that and accommodate. That'd be a really interesting
Uh-huh.
conversation.
That's fascinating. I would have never thought of a ship, but I like that. That's a
Mhm.
great idea.
Mhm. And when you're thinking of warships and hospitals, they're sort of the same level of criticality as well.
Yeah.
Like, something, building a library, if it doesn't work very well, people won't die. But,
Mhm.
some of these big infrastructure projects, like lives are at risk, so more considering the innovation. And as you say, Kathleen, even if the equipment that we bring into the hospital now can fit through your traditional door, you still have to have enough foresight to realize that there may down the road be equipment that doesn't fit through the door. So how do you plan for the unforeseen? That's, again, therein lies the rub, really. And it takes that sort of open mind, talking to the collaboration piece, all of the
Yeah.
things that we've talked about on the front end, and crystal ball gazing, kind of some of the things that we might need to mitigate.
You know what? This is such an important discussion because it does start to gather everything at the front end where it
Mhm.
should be. I mean, you want to learn by lived experience, but you really want to put that to work. And you don't want to go through the same scenario more than once without learning. So it really means that we have to bring so much of this to the forefront that it needs to be part of a planning discussion that needs to involve procurement so that we actually go to market in a proper way, that needs to involve, design and construction folks, that it needs to involve people who are going to be managing this asset with the occupants also. So much front end stuff here that we've learned over time by running through the whole scenario and dealing with the back end of things, right? So it's I think a fairly strong message to
Mhm.
organizations that how we go to market is really, really critical,
Yeah, I've always said, the planning pays off tenfold downstream. And I think that's never more true than now.
right?
Right. And yeah, so all the players at the table.
And I like metrics, and I'm glad that you said that, Maureen, because 10x is now stuck in my head on what I was going to offer. So I don't know the numbers. I'm going to research this immediately after this call. I guess a healthy estimate is using the principles from IPD or lean. You're going to gain 20% efficiencies just for the project. For the full life cycle of the asset, bringing in what we spoke about and thinking of that full life cycle, I'm confident it would be close to 100%.
Hmm.
Could save a substantial amount. And that's what has to be communicated because everyone will keep doing the same thing. But if we're able to share with people and saying, if you follow this, you're going to save 20%. If we just break down all the disasters, I'm sure Ottawa Light Rail would be a great example of what was forecasted to date, where we're at, and what we've hemorrhaged. It would exceed 100%.
Yeah. And that kind of ammunition really would bring the political will to bear to put the resources into the planning, right?
That's you
Because
got
it's always like, oh, we don't have time to plan it properly, but we always have time to do it over again when it went badly. But if you can show the numbers and show, like, this is why we need to slow it down, do the front end piece. So it's so important. And if you don't
Uh,
have the metrics and you don't have the proof, you're not going to get that, the resources that you need. Yeah.
Absolutely true. I'm a huge proponent. Certainly you folks are too, because we've been down the path. But we really see the value in the whole front end and getting that correct so that everything then flows so smoothly afterwards. And yes, there will be bumps in the road as we flow through it, for sure. And because there is so much change going on right now, and a lot of it is even, we can't even anticipate it. But what we do know is we're stronger together up front when we all are sort of working through the best approach to this. And so I think that really is the message that we're stronger together up front. It's
Mhm.
easier to plan than it is to clean up, I would say.
yes,
So
yes.
let's really make that the focus of
Mhm.
how we want to design, construct, and manage our built environment.
Yeah.
And have just like a doctor annual visit is have the key players that were at the front end check in on an annual basis if required, because you're managing that change and risk.
Right.
There'll always be change. That's again, there's always risk.
Yes.
It's managing it. And the more of that that's managed in real time, the smoother everything else goes.
Yeah, and building those checkpoints in, as you say, like anticipating that when things are going well, let's check in. What's going well? How can we build on that? Just so that it's not that, hair on fire emergency where everybody now everything has to grind to a halt. So more important than ever, I think, to build in those regular risk checks. Yeah.
And it all comes down to governance in terms of, say,
Mhm.
an RACI model. And when each party's brought in, everything to me is governance and risk. So being able to define that front end, how everyone plays together along the life cycle of the asset, and it can all be quantified in terms of cost control and managing expectations. Because what we can't lose sight of are all of this has been created for people in the facilities, employees, citizens, and that's what has to be at front and center is the health and safety for them, then cost, then reputation, but health and safety for why they're being built.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one thing about this industry, certainly, and because, the built environment certainly has a service life, it's planned for that, but it's also a learning opportunity. And we do that every day. And I think what the beauty ends up being is how we can take that learning and apply it to what we're going to do tomorrow. I think this was a great discussion to sort of set that out. And again, it bears repeating. Get everybody in the same room at the same time, right up front before you even turn the switch on. You got a plan for it. So,
And capture those lessons learned,
yes.
from your projects, from other projects. Keep your eye on the landscape because there's always lessons to be learned. And of course, doing the same thing over again, expecting a different result, never a good approach, right?
And
Always
we'll
new
circle
things.
to the conversation
Yeah,
of having the community of practice that we mentioned at the beginning where those
exactly.
lessons get shared. So,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hey, this has been a great discussion. I think this is such valuable information for anyone, for sure, in the building environment, but absolutely for facility managers because they are life cycle people by virtue of what they do. So I want to thank you both. This has been quite enlightening and very invigorated discussion. And again, I think we've teamed up, so we're showing folks how to do it.
Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks,
Yes.
Maureen. Just hearing your expertise and learning. And Kathleen, I've listened to some of the past episodes and just your vast knowledge and the people you bring on and the lessons that are shared. There is so much great information from your Dancing with Change that needs to get out to more people.
Yeah, and thank you for including me. And you're really walking the walk of that collaboration, community of practice, share the lessons, that kind of thing. So I think it's a great opportunity. It's been fun.
Well, you know what the upside for everyone is all the great people out there because this is a people business too. So
Right.
thanks very much.
Thank you, folks. Okay, excellent. Thanks, Kathleen. Bye, Hinesh. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, thank you.